Church fathers used Greek metaphysics to rewrite Jesus, and academia inherited the rewrite. This is a part that, guys, that literally makes my brain scream. These quote-unquote church fathers use these Greek categories. And what they did is they detached Jesus from David. They detached Jesus from Israel, detached Jesus from the covenant, the land, the tribe, the history, and they turned him into the eternal cosmic logos. But the Jews attached themselves to David, attached themselves to Israel, attached themselves to the covenant, attached themselves to the land, attached themselves to the tribe, and attached themselves to history. But guess what? They're none of that because they're Persian. Do you see what's happening? Does that make sense? Same thing. Opposite sides of the same coin. And modern scholars inherited this whole framework without even realizing it. And they're talking in Klingon because that's not the world Jesus was in. So when you hear them talk about Israel, it means Jew. Logos is Christ. Paul is a Jewish thinker. Jesus is a Jewish teacher. They're not doing history. They're not even doing biblical studies. They're doing Greek and Persian metaphysics, pretending they have a historical mask on. And yes, their whole system of bullshit is designed to make you feel dumb. Their whole academic posture is, well, I wrote a book. If you don't understand our vague, undefined, circular arguments and ridiculous, unhistorical, inaccurate categories, that means you are uneducated. Not that we are completely incoherent. No, not that.
All right, fellas. What's the order of business? Wait. 1 damn minute. I'm supposed to be the alpha, right? I mean, the only reason I'm asking is I'm a little bit confused. If I'm the alpha, why is someone who was most definitely not the alpha holding the badass shotgun?
Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. All those in the session, all of those who are listening, don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules, or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote-unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely that's a place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing. Okay. We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, you know, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. We are hitting Paul's Paganism, episode 7. And we're calling this one Catastrophic Category Error. And the ancient Greek BS, which is modern scholars woo-woo. And they're just butchering categories, making up terms to follow this pseudo story that just doesn't hold up until you're brave enough to switch categories. So let's get started and see what in the world am I talking about here. What do I mean? Our agenda today, Acts 9, we're continuing in Acts 9, and we're just going to go ahead and read a few paragraphs as usual, but we can't really break those down too much until we get our categories right, and that's what we're going to work on today. So we're going to get a little technical. Bear with me. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can because there's a lot, and the implications of the information is a lot. And we're not going to chase down every single implication today, but we'll probably return to these categories as we continue from here on out in reading Acts and reading Luke, because we got away with it thus far, being real basic and real simple in our vocabulary and categories. But it's about to get a lot more complex. So let me share some of that complexity and nuance with you without going down every rabbit hole. And hopefully you'll understand what I mean by that. There's plenty of time to get to all of it. But what I mean is, to start off, Greek philosophy, okay, to me is just starseed bullshit for PhDs. Let me explain. Let me explain, okay? And I'm sorry I'm roasting the New Age starseeds who are like, yeah, whatever, Pleiades, and whatever. They have like all these intergalactic systems of hoo-hoo. And I'm sitting here like, okay, You're a star seed from the Pleiades working with the Intergalactic Federation to assist Earth in ascending. Great. Show me the evidence. Show me the evidence of where well, I don't really have any evidence. It's just kind of my opinion. And actually the evidence shows something completely opposite. And it's not really scientific and it's not really historic, but I'm relying solely on what someone else told me. That's what scholars are. I need people to stop being in awe of scholars, biblical scholars, and textual critics, as though these guys, these guys deserve your awe. They don't. They have some good points. They give some good information. They're smart people. But we need to demystify this scholar worship and this church father worship. Martin Luther said, well, Bart Ehrman said, well, like who the hell are these people? Well, they have a PhD. Don't give a shit. They're using the wrong categories. Once I lay out the categories for you today, that's why I just did the roasting video, okay? I didn't do the roasting video that we just put up of all that line of scholars with all their different opinions on Paul. I didn't do that. I didn't do that to go pick fights with scholars, okay? What I did that for is to show you some very mainstream, prominent people all over the internet who are spouting off their quote-unquote PhD or rabbinical expert backed opinions on what's going on with Paul. But what they're not doing is giving you the categories in any semblance that remotely is recognizable, legitimate, or accurate to the actual functioning people on the ground in ancient first century. They're not doing that. So they're painting this cartoon world that's no better, that's no more accurate, no more legit, no more historically quote unquote proven or legitimate than the starseeds yammering about the Pleiades. Ehrman, Tabor, Paula Fredrickson, all these guys, that little dude from Myth Vision who thinks he's so smart, that snarky little dude, all y'all, you're on the Pleiades, okay? You're literally speaking Klingon, and it's a movie. It's fake. It's phony. You're not using accurate first century categories at all. What you're doing is taking a cartoon story that's been handed to you and trying to present that to the public as though it's coherent because you have a PhD. That's what's happening. And so I need to strip this scholarness and see how either A, ridiculous, or B, corrupt and sold out they are. Or just these guys, these guys, especially when they get snarky, these guys are the epitome of take the log out of your own eye first, gentlemen. They're running around, writing books, making a shit ton of money with a shit ton of influence, trying to point out the speck everywhere else, and they've got this giant beam in their eye. And we're going to talk about that. But their beam is okay. The Pleiades, starseed, hoo-hoo people, well, they're just ridiculous. But their philosophical ancient worldview, that's good. Not the modern Pleiades people, that's bad. But it's the same level of ridiculous cartoonness. That's what I'm saying. So we're going to look at Greek philosophy. It's basically just starseed bullshit for PhDs. We're going to find ourselves in a category maze that's extraordinarily complex with endless implications. And we're going to talk through those a little bit today and then maybe hit them more as they come up while we're studying and reading. And, you can just sit back and think of these questions on your own. Like, if these categories change, What does that mean about this? What does that mean for this? What about the taxes? What about the law? What about the Roman legal status? All these questions, is this like an expat? Yeah. Like, how does this work? And those are legit questions, and we'll get to these as we keep unraveling. You probably don't know what I'm talking about yet, but stick with me. Because we're going to attempt to answer who is Paul and why we don't care, but they all seem to care very much. As a matter of fact, that's all they seem to care about is Paul. Then, so that's today. Then we're going to do a quiz, and we're going to do a scholar category roast. Okay. We're going to throw that video back up, that montage that I made last time, and we're going to go through it person by person. And you guys can use it as like a background knowledge test to see if you can identify their category errors, their biases, and where they're going wrong in their analysis, which nobody that ever interviews them ever seems to ask them, because the people who are interviewing them don't know what the hell they're talking about either. That's okay. So they just let them get away with this blatant nonsense because they don't understand what they're talking about. Why don't they understand what they're talking about? They're not in the Davidic covenant. That's why. They have no clue what it is. They don't know what they're doing. So I say that in the warning, it wasn't written for scholars and it wasn't written for Jews. That's why nobody knows what the hell's going on, because they're not in Davidic covenant. They don't even know what that means. And they're all running around in category errors with Paul. So the next time we're going to start with that quiz and see if after our lessons today, we can all rewatch that video and actually use it not only as a roasting the scholars moment, but as a quiz, as a knowledge check to see where are we? How's our thinking? Can we identify these categories? And are there any categories of these scholars that we agree with or don't agree with? But first we have to understand what they're saying. Does that make sense? So we're going to try and test our knowledge next time using that same video. We're also going to talk about when Jesus quoted the Aramaic Targum. Who are the Hellenists? Really? That's a good one. Oh boy. Where do we get to that one? We're going to talk about the evolution of the Logos. Why did the Hellenists try to kill Paul? We're going to look deeply into the Stephen speech. And finally, get to resurrection within competing cosmologies. All right. After we do all that, we're going to look at the Davidic covenant resurrection model. Okay. And I'm giving you a time. Sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. But to get to that point, we need to build all of this background knowledge. So why do I say that PhDs are like ancient starseed lovers? Well, here's why. The entire Western academic posture is New Age mumbo jumbo is beneath us. Okay. But ancient mumbo jumbo, that's elite. And that's literally what it is. Okay. These scholars pull out these words, these phrases that come from these ancient Greek pagan church fathers and ancient Greek philosophers. And it's so hard for a lot of common people to keep up with them because they give off this air of you don't know, therefore you're less than us, therefore you're somehow stupid. Well, let me tell you, we're on the Luke 10 dumbass protocol proudly over here, where we do not stop asking questions and grilling the author of the Bible and grilling the scholars and the rabbis and the preachers who talk about the Bible. We don't stop grilling them because they quote unquote have the authority. No, we're going to ask our dumbass questions. That's the dumbass Luke 10 protocol. The knowledge wasn't given to the learned. It was given to the dumbasses. So every time we can stop and ask a question and clarify, we're going to ask. Okay. We're not afraid of saying, what does Gnosticism actually mean today in the middle centuries and all the way back in the first century? Did Gnosticism exist before Marcion? Because we're really tired of hearing about Marcion all the time. Oh, yes, it did. We ask these questions. How is it defined? How did that definition change over time? Whereas the scholars are just like, well, it was this Neoplatonism and, Marcion and then the Gnostics and the bit. And you're like, whoa, slow down. Can you define those terms?
You understand? What? No answer? You don't really think that you were going to get through this without being punished now, did you?
Because right now, you're babbling a bunch of mumbo jumbo. And until they define their terms and their worldview and their biases, nobody understands them. They're like, oh, wow, that's really smart. And we're gonna get them on this. And their category errors and their mumbo jumbo that they adopted from pagan Greek church fathers, okay? That's what we're doing. But because it's ancient, to them, that means elite. To us, Bart Ehrman sitting there yammering, right? Or Tovia Singer yammering about Neoplatonistic thought and the Gnosticism and Marcion. That's starseed mumbo jumbo because you're not defining your categories. We're going to catch you in that. Like in the video I showed Tovia Singer yammering about how Paul's running around talking about, his Greek philosophy and all these other things, right? Which is true. Tovia Singer's absolutely true. That's what Paul was doing. But what he didn't tell you is that was Jewish. And it's in their Targum, and we're going to prove it. That's the problem. He's using mumbo jumbo without telling you it's not only Greek. As a matter of fact, the vocabulary is Greek, but the logos as a what is Greek. The logos as a who, that's Persian, which is Jewish, Second Temple. And that's why it's in your Targum. He won't say that. He won't say that because he wants Paul to be pagan instead of Jewish. I'm saying, well, the Jews were pagan because they taught in the Targum about the cosmic mediator. That's what it's Persian. Go to Persia, Tovia. Go to Persia. He won't tell you that.
Oh, my goodness. Look at this.
Because he's collapsing the category of Jew versus Gentile. Am I making sense? Bart Ehrman, up. Well, Israel's the servant, and they suffered, and they will be redeemed. Well, who's the ones that made them suffer? Well, symbolism.
I just don't know. It seems like you're trying to speak, but you just took a hell of a hit.
And then the elites came back, and they were the ones that suffered. They're Israel now. What? Do you see how they do that? Because no one's holding. That woman who interviewed him didn't say, "Excuse me, Mr. Ehrman, how are you defining your categories?" They can't do it. So that's the places we're going to catch them in today, because they're giving you mumbo jumbo, and they're not telling you what the Pleiades is. Okay, they're literally speaking Klingon. Here's their move: we define nothing, but we utter lots of words that say nothing. And then we pretend that you look dumb, so don't ask a question. Then we define our terms with a whole string of useless words that still mean nothing. But we have a PhD. These guys are cosmic woo-woo bullshit fanboys with PhDs. And so, no, we're going to roast them all day long. We're going to roast them all day long because we're really tired of their games. So Greek metaphysics that nobody understands is socially acceptable woo-woo. Academia treats chakras, energy grids, astral planes, cosmic emanations, occult, supernatural, anything in the modern world as woo-woo. Well, that's not serious. PhD starseeds, then they turn around and they worship Plato and his quote unquote forms. That's legit. Mania, the ascent, archetypes, logos, prime mover, substance of God, essence of the Trinity, hypostasis, as if these categories, cosmic dualism, and they're ranting about these categories. Paul's quote unquote vision is legit, but modern supernatural, not legit. The rabbi in the video I showed you last time saying, well, we used to force the Christians who came to the synagogues, the Jesus believers who came to the synagogues, we used to stand them up and make them say a blessing. And when they got to the last blessing, it was really a curse on themselves. Excuse me? A curse to void and nullify them. Well, that's okay. Rabbis can believe in curses. Ancient people can believe in curses. Not today. We have to call that something else. Do you see the hypocrisy? They're talking about a supernatural book as though everything supernatural can only be defined by ancient Greek pagans or ancient rabbinic pagans. That's it. Persians and Catholics. Those are the only two groups. Anybody else in modern times, well, they're crazy. Because these little Plato categories and Philo of Alexandria and Cerinthus and Paul, the lunatic visionary magician himself, well, those are scientific, those are real. That's how they're acting. All this stuff is real. And that's legit. But anything modern, well, that's crazy. It's the same shit, different vocabulary. Same shit, different vocabulary. If you don't believe me, just go read some shit about Gnosticism and cosmic dualism. It's literally the same genre. But the academics treat it as fancy and elite and acceptable because it's wearing a toga. Shame on them. Academia loves Greek philosophy, church fathers, ancient rabbinic studies, because it's vague enough to not mean anything. Does that make sense? Plato and the church fathers are the original. I will now speak for 700 pages and define nothing. Why? Because if you define nothing, you can't be disproven. You can't be pinned down. You can't be held accountable. You can always say, well, that's not what I meant. You can always reinterpret yourself. You can always sound deep and brilliant. It is the perfect academic survival strategy. You can't fail if you never say anything concrete. That's why we don't respect scholars. Greek metaphysics gives scholars a way to sound profound while completely avoiding any legitimate and historically accurate Hebrew categories. This is the real reason they cling to it. Hebrew categories are tribal, covenant, genealogy, territory, politics, history, jurisdictional. No, they want it to be a language without any grapheme morpheme proof. When they say ancient Hebrew Bible, excuse me? Remember we talked about this? There isn't one. Show me the phoneme grapheme map of ancient Hebrew. They can't. They can't. It's Bigfoot scrolls. They're lying. They're making it up. It doesn't exist. There was no grapheme phoneme language. Therefore, there's no scrolls written in Hebrew. Like, it's Phoenician. They don't get it. But they have this whole fantasy story they have to cling to. So Hebrew has to be a language, therefore it can't be a people. And if Hebrew is a language, not a people, then, well, Israel can't be a people either. It all has to be Jewish now. Do you see it? By changing Hebrew to a language, instead of a people with a covenant, well, Second Temple's people just get everything now.
No! That's not how it works. Now, I already told you people. First one's free. Then what I say? I said I will shut that shit down.
They just get everything now. Israel, that doesn't exist. That's not real. Pay no attention to what your Bible says. There's no such thing as Ephraim in Israel. Don't look there. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's just Jew and Gentile. So these categories are abstract, universal, disembodied, apolitical, non-tribal, non-covenant, non-historical, and this is what they're working with. And I call them Greek categories because they're following the pagan church fathers. They're also Persian categories for our rabbis and our Jews. So our Christian scholars arguing for Christianity stuff, they're in the Greek categories. The rabbis arguing for Jewish stuff and the Jewish scholars, well, they're stuck in Persian categories. And they're the same thing. Academics prefer these because they're safer, vague, less controversial, easier to stretch, easier to universalize and spiritualize, and keep their Jew-Gentile category, which makes them a shit ton of money with that hatred and that rivalry in the end times marketing of those two groups. But they're not legitimate. That's what I'm saying. If you look at the actual first century Hebrew categories, it forces you to talk about land, lineage, covenant, kingship, priesthood, north and south, different prophecies for different groups of people, and actual history. But Greek categories, or pagan Greek church fathers, or post-Persian cosmology lets you float above all of that and just say, the form of the good emanates through the logos, which literally means nothing, but it sounds fancy. And that sentence could come out of the ancient Persian Jewish Second Temple Targum just as quickly as it could come out of a 4th century Catholic church father rambling. And there is a huge problem. The Jews are accusing the Christians of being cosmic woo-woo people. The Christians are accusing the Jews of not being cosmic woo-woo people and being too, quote-unquote, literal about the Bible, waiting for an earthly king, when the truth is, both of them are waiting for an earthly king. And both of them are actually talking about the cosmic mediator. They're just lying to you about which one they choose to put up as what represents the first century thinking. That's all they're doing. That's all they're doing.
I need you to know me. So, back to it.
Church fathers use Greek metaphysics to rewrite Jesus, and academia inherited the rewrite. This is a part that, guys, that literally makes my brain scream. These quote-unquote church fathers use these Greek categories. And what they did is they detached Jesus from David. They detached Jesus from Israel, detached Jesus from the covenant, the land, the tribe, the history, and they turned him into the eternal cosmic logos. But the Jews attached themselves to David, attached themselves to Israel, attached themselves to the covenant, attached themselves to the land, attached themselves to the tribe, and attached themselves to history. But guess what? They're none of that because they're Persian. Do you see what's happening? Does that make sense? Same thing. Opposite sides of the same coin. And modern scholars inherited this whole framework without even realizing it. They're talking in Klingon because that's not the world Jesus was in. So when you hear them talk about Israel, it means Jew. Logos is Christ. Paul is a Jewish thinker. Jesus is a Jewish teacher. They're not doing history. They're not even doing biblical studies. They're doing Greek and Persian metaphysics, pretending they have a historical mask on. And yes, their whole system of bullshit is designed to make you feel dumb. Their whole academic posture is, well, I wrote a book. If you don't understand our vague, undefined, circular arguments and ridiculous, unhistorical, inaccurate categories, that means you are uneducated. Not that we are completely incoherent. No, not that. It's a power move. And they're wrong. They use jargon abstraction. These scholars and rabbis and Christian preachers are literally out there using undefined terms with abstraction from a 1,700-year-old metaphysical debates. And they're doing that with a tone of superiority. This is why I'm calling them ancient starseeds. They're literally abstracting everything, collapsing categories, being wildly historically inaccurate, not defining their terms. When they do define their terms, they're circular definitions, and they're inheriting and standing on 1,700-year-old metaphysical debates from the Christian church. Okay. And if you want to go back even further, go to the Persian Empire. They're using their categories and pretending as though the Persian religion that infused its cosmology into the Hebrew people is legit. And they're talking from those categories. And they're slapping all this bullshit with a tone of superiority within a historically incorrect category, which makes their title as scholar dubious at best. They're doing all this to create the illusion of depth. They're not deep. They're not deep. So our reaction over here to scholars is shut up. And we think it's the correct scholarly instinct. We're not trying to be dismissive. We're trying to be accurate. And these guys are not. And they're jankifying the whole program. If they can't be accurate, we will be dismissive to them. Because when the subject is Davidic inheritance, northern tribes, covenant logic, ancient Near East cosmology, priesthood versus kingship, land and jurisdiction, Greek metaphysics, and Persian cosmology is literally irrelevant. It was irrelevant to Jesus. You know who it wasn't irrelevant to? Paul. It's like trying to explain a family tree using quantum physics. They're using the wrong toolkit. So yes, these scholars treat ancient woo-woo of the Persian cosmology and the Greek pagan church father cosmology as elite. But modern woo-woo is trash because it protects their authority. You guys aren't confused. You guys aren't missing something. They pull the same trick with Paul's binary, Jew versus Gentile. They can't admit that Jesus literally never taught this. So they pretend, well, that's not real. There was no curse. Ephraim Israel was just, I don't know, magically erased by the Second Temple Jews. They can't say that. Ephraim just somehow got lost. You're watching a prestige hierarchy built on ancient mysticism, disguised as intellectual rigor, enforced through vagueness, protected by tone and arrogance, and maintained by institutional gatekeeping to protect the Jewish and Christian priesthood. That's what they're doing. So our montage of ridiculous scholars, the Pauline Scholar Audit. We've got Paula Fredrickson. Paul is an end times Jew who never left the fold. Excuse me? Yep, Paula, guess what? He's also wrong. Ignore the whole sperm destruction magical entity conveyor belt. She calls all of Paul's epiphany narrative ancient Near East classic textbook epiphany narrative. And anything he said against the apostles, anything he said about the cosmic Christ, well, we're just going to pretend that doesn't. That was rhetoric. That was symbolism. Really, Miss Fredrickson? Give me a break. Give me a break. Robert Eisenman. Paul's a Roman agent and a spy for the Herodians. He's a Fed. Ooh, the Imperial Line's undercover narc. Eisenman, have you yet figured out that Herodians weren't Roman? They were Esau, dipshit. Esau would be Edomite. Judea. Judah. Caleb moved right into Judah. There's not a lot of ancient people more Judah than Esau. Why are you giving Herod to Rome, dude? Maccabees, Hasmonean, Herodian. It's literally an offshoot of the Maccabees. And he's telling you it's pagan Rome. They worked with Rome, but if you can't say he was Herodian and Roman, he was a Roman citizen, sir. But Herod was an Edomite. Oh, Edomites take you to the Hasmoneans, which take you to the Maccabees, which put you smack dab in the middle of Judah. But no. Eisenman doesn't want you to know that. He wants to blame it on Rome. So he's just going to combine Rome and Herodian together and say it's Paul. He's not giving you the whole story because he has to protect the Jewish folks. Does that make sense? The Jewish temple was legitimate. No, Herodian. Literally the guys over Galilee were Herods. Maccabee. Oh, dear boy. Paul is a Hellenistic myth maker who invented Christ. Yeah, he's a pagan fan fiction writer using Amun-Ra cosmology. Okay. Robert Price. He's a Gnostic mythicist who didn't believe in a physical Jesus. Or he's Paul's Simon Magus. Like Jesus who? Paul's vibrating on the Incal grid of occult. But that's not real. Paul is the new perspective champion of the church. Yeah, he's the Logos CEO, rebranding the Second Temple scam. Paul's the anti-Peter. It's a great conflict. Oh, yeah. He's the Logos bully, trying to fight the Ephrathite scepter. They don't even know what that means. Herman Neberding. Paul is actually Simon Magus in disguise. Yeah, he's a cult priesthood wizard. A cult priesthood wizard with a Roman ID card. So if he's Simon Magus and he's also working for the Jewish priesthood, put those together. It seems a little occulty to me. You think that Jewish priesthood was doing anything janky in Second Temple Persia? What do you think? No. They were the true followers of God. Really. Got to protect our Jewish friends. Bart Ehrman. Paul's the secondary founder of Christianity. Yeah. Ehrman, he's the guy that changed the locks of the door while the heir was out in the yard looking for his sheep. Secondary founder of Christianity. Give me a break. So the first thing we're going to do, getting off of our scholar roast, let's go to the text. Let's go to the text because we're coming up on this part in Luke where our category collapse that all of these scholars and rabbis and Christian preachers love to do. And we're going to find right here a great opportunity to define some categories that they just seem to ignore. And the question we're going to do is, who is this one? There's our dumbass, Luke 10 dumbass protocol questions, scholars. Who's Paul talking about in Acts 9 when he says, this one? Which one? Because we just came through a classic ancient Near East Epiphany narrative. He got initiated walking down Straight Street. And he starts preaching and he's talking about this one. Well, which one, scholars? We want to know which one. Unfortunately, you guys are in the wrong category, so you've never written a book about this. So we'll handle it ourselves. All right, where were we in Acts 9? Immediately something like flakes or scales fell from his eyes. He was baptized, taking food. We talked about all of this, okay? He was with disciples in Damascus for several days. Now, here we go. We're going to start Acts 9:20. And this is the part I really want to look at. And right away, he began proclaiming Jesus in the synagogues. We'll get to synagogue. We'll get to synagogue in a minute. Put a pin in synagogue. Because my question here is, which ones, scholars? Oh, well, synagogue Jewish. Are you sure? Are you sure that all synagogues are Jewish? According to which category? That's not accurately historically, scholars. How do you define Jewish synagogue? Because there were Israelite synagogues that had nothing to do with the Jewish temple, legally or otherwise. But we don't teach that. We don't teach about the dispersion people who have their own synagogues that were legally recognized by Rome, but not at all attached to the temple elites of Babylon, Persia, called the Jews. So how are you scholars defining synagogue? Uh-oh, category collapse. See what happens when you ask Luke 10 dumbass questions that they refuse? But we're not going to get there yet. We're not going to get there. Here, we're going to go. He began proclaiming Jesus in synagogues, that this is the Son of God. Now, whoa. This man, does that say, does this word mean this man? As opposed to this one, or this woman, or this thing? Why is it this man? Oh, another this. Well, there's no man here. The man again. Very purpose? This what? This man. Oh, well, I didn't know that this word in Greek meant this man. We're going to have to take a look at that. That's a little strange. Oh, wait a minute. This person or thing? It can be a thing? So you mean this one, not this man, but this one. Like this dog, this cat, this suitcase, this cosmic entity, this man, this woman, this child, this table, this goat. So you mean this? Specifically, this one. Oh, this very thing. Uh-oh. I wonder why they chose, instead of this one, I wonder why they chose this man. What do the translators want you to believe about the Epiphany narrative? Let's ask ourselves that. The translators have a theological agenda to protect the institution of Christianity. So they want you to think that that Greek phrase, that Greek word, means this man, because Jesus is a man. So they want your brain to go, oh, Paul's saying this man Jesus is the one I saw, and put Jesus, the man, together with Paul's epiphany. That's what they want your brain to do. That's what they're making Paul say. This man, the Davidic heir Jesus, is the Christ. That's what they're trying to tie up for you, that I saw in the desert. That's what they're forcing you to think by saying this man. But it doesn't say that. It says this one. Okay? This one is the Son of God. He's proclaiming Jesus in the synagogues, saying that this one is the Son of God. And all who heard him were astonished. Is this not the man who in Jerusalem was trying to destroy those who called on this name, Jesus? And has he not come here for the very purpose of bringing them bound before the chief priests? But Saul came more and more capable. No, he didn't become capable. He became more emboldened, invigorated, frenzied, if you will, and threw into confusion the Jews, quote unquote, look at our word, Judeos, who lived in Damascus, by proving, no, that's not proving, it's arguing for, presenting the case, concluding, demonstrating, debating, okay, not proving, that this is the Christ, not this man Jesus. Do you see the word Jesus anywhere here? There's no word Jesus here. Judeos who lived in Damascus, by arguing that this one is the Christ, not this man Jesus. It doesn't say that. Okay? So what they're hiding from you is, who is this one? What is he doing here? We're going to take a look at that in a minute. Put a pin in that. It doesn't say this man Jesus is the Christ. That's not what it says. It says this one is the Christ. This one vision that I'm talking about named itself Jesus and is the Christ. That's what he's saying. This vision in the desert is the Christ. And it called itself Jesus. This one calling itself Jesus is the Christ. This vision, the vision is the Christ, named Jesus. That's what he's saying. But after, we'll get there in a minute. We'll put a pin in that. We're going to get right back to that on our slide deck. Now, after some days had passed, the Judeos, Jews, quote unquote, plotted to kill him. But their plot was made known to Saul. He found out about it. And they kept close watch on the gates day and night so they might kill him. But his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a basket. How very Mosaic of you, Paul. What a great story. And when he came to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples, He attempted to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles, and he related to them how on the road he'd seen the Lord. There was the Lord on the road, and that spoke to him. And that Lord spoke to him. That same Lord that he saw on the road. Okay? And how in Damascus, he had spoken boldly. He had proselytized, if you will, in the name of Jesus. And he was with them, going in and out at Jerusalem, speaking out in the name of the Lord. He was talking and disputing with the Greek-speaking Jews. What category is this?
You have no idea how not cool that shit is. But I think you're going to be up to speed shortly.
Greek-speaking Jews? Hold up. As opposed to what? as opposed to Hebrew-speaking Jews? Great. Hebrew-speaking, show me the map. Show me the grapheme, phoneme map. We did this already back in the ritual series where I break this down as a person who actually understands language acquisition and the need for grapheme, phoneme mapping that they didn't have. So they weren't speaking Hebrew because it wasn't a thing.
And it's really very simple. So even if you're stupid, which you very may well be, you can understand it. You ready? Here goes. Pay attention.
Were they speaking Gunt language because it had no vowels? Like the priests are standing up in the middle of these temples going, because they didn't have fucking vowels. Is that what you mean by Hebrew? No, you mean a dialect of Phoenician? Is that what you mean? You mean a Canaanite dialect? Like the Moabites, the Amorites, the Persians, Aramaic, maybe that language, maybe Aramaic. They certainly weren't Hebrew-speaking Jews. That wasn't a thing. So everyone spoke Greek. They used the Septuagint. It was the Greek Bible, not the Hebrew Bible. It was the Hebrew people's oral traditions and stories that were written into Greek and created a Bible. Now the temple elites hauled off under Persia's direction, working with the corrupt priesthood, who seemed to think, the priesthood seems to think somewhere they got land and the right to rule, which we've already destroyed that. Go see our Psalm 78 video and the earlier part of this Paul's Paganism series. They weren't supposed to be in charge anyway, but they took it upon themselves, the elites did, to come in and, well, they wrote this is ready for this. They wrote an Aramaic Targum, and wait till you see what's in that. So maybe they mean the non-Aramaic Targum people? Because it was Jew. The common language was Greek. What are you talking about? That's not an accurate translation. The translation, the word, look at the word. What does the word say? Hellenists. Uh-oh. We have another category collapse. We're going to find out who the Hellenists are. And this should piss you off. When you find out who the Hellenists are, you should be pissed off. Just saying. Can you guys guess who the Hellenists are? All right. Well, he was talking and disputing with the Hellenists, but they were also looking for a way to kill him. Now, these Hellenists, Greek-speaking Jews, are not the same as the Iudaists up here that lived in two different words. Well, why is Luke using this word here and using this word here, but your trusty English Bible is translating everything with the word Jew? Why? Can you explain that, scholars? Why aren't we talking about that? Are they the same Jews? Are they different Jews? You mean there were different factions? Did they all consider themselves Jews? Well, Luke is an outsider, so he's writing from an outsider perspective. Does that matter? Is Luke's definition of Jew, an Iudaeus, and Hellenist, a little bit different maybe than Paul? Is because he's a Pharisee. Maybe Paul has a different idea of what constitutes a quote-unquote Jew. And is Luke's category of Hellenist and Iudaeus the same as Paul? And what about these ethnos Gentiles? Where does that go? What are those? How do all these categories work, scholars? And are they the same categories as Jesus and James? I don't know. It's a little suspect to me. But they were looking for a way to kill him too. So we've got quote-unquote Jews and quote-unquote Greek-speaking Jews, and they both want to kill Paul. But clearly they're different sets of people because Luke is using two different words. Why? Why? Is that a dumb question, scholars? Or is that a, I don't know, Luke 10 dumbass protocol where we actually ask questions and what are the implications of things rather than trying to force fit things into a predetermined institutional Klingon narrative? And when the brothers learned about this, they took him to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. So the church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria had peace, being built up and walking in fear of the Lord in the comfort of the Holy Spirit increased in number. We've talked about this whole part, right? We talked about this before when we were breaking down Paul's demon meat. But what we didn't talk about was, well, we know they sent him off to Tarsus, like, take your ball and go home. But once you realize who the Hellenists were and that they're not the same people as Judaeus, well, it's going to make a little more sense why the apostles and disciples sent him home. Just saying. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs, scholars. Uh-oh. So who is this one? Well, this one is the vision. We're going to start with that. Remember that question? When Paul says this one is the Christ. Well, who is this one? Let's run through this real quick, and then we'll get back to our categories. All right, let's see. We got to go backwards. Okay. This whole phrase, the reason this whole piece in Acts feels funny, like this one, it doesn't read well in the Greek, and they have to insert all that, this man Jesus, that's not there. The reason it's happening is because it feels like what Paul is saying in the Greek is the one I saw in the desert vision, that one is the Christ. Because that's what the Greek actually says. The syntax of the Greek, this is what Paul's saying. He's not preaching that Jesus, son of David, is the anointed king of the reunited house of David. That's not what Paul's preaching. What Paul is saying to these quote-unquote synagogue quote-unquote Jews are the one I saw, this vision that I saw in the desert, that one is the Christ. It called itself Jesus. That's what the Greek says. So he's not proclaiming son of David in Acts 9. The Greek demonstrative, this one, always points to a referent already in the narrative. And this is key. This one right here, this very one, the one we're talking about. And remember, he started with Jesus, the light in the desert, and then moved to that vision is the Christ. So as he's quote unquote escalating or getting more zealous or getting more bold, or as your shitty translation says, capable. Remember I said, no, he's getting more riled up. He takes Jesus' name out completely and just says, this vision thing is the Christ. He called himself Jesus. This is the Jesus and this is the Christ. So he's taking it another step further as he continues to argue with these quote unquote Jews in the quote unquote synagogue. It never means Jesus of Nazareth. It never means Jesus, the heir of David. Unless Jesus is the immediate referent in the discourse. So when you see this one is the Christ, you must ask yourself, who is this one in the immediate narrative? Not what does later theology shove back in and assume the referent should be, or who I want Paul to be talking about. That's not how you read. So in Acts 9, the referent is the epiphany figure, not Jesus of Nazareth. The only entity in Acts 9 that Paul has encountered is the light, the voice, the desert epiphany narrative apparition. So when he uses this one is the Christ, the grammar points back to the one who appeared, the one who spoke, the one who blinded me, not the son of David. See what's the trick they're playing? This one, a literate brain can catch the object mismatch. The pronouns point to the apparition, but the theology of the institutional rhetoric and scholars who support the institutional rhetoric desperately wanted to point to Jesus, son of David, man of the Galilee. But the grammar's not cooperating. This one is the light show. That's what the syntax actually supports. But as always, Paul is vague enough in his word salads to allow fertile ground for preachers and scholars, because they love to get lost in a category maze. And this is where I want you to get your notebook out, because boy, this is a maze. And we're only going to go down like 2 or 3 paths of this maze today. And out of those 2 or 3 paths, we're only going to get about 10 feet deep. Okay. If there's a whole lot more, and you see all those bridges in the background, well, those are the implications of more things. But we don't want to do this for 3 months. We just want to give you an overview of these categories. And we can deal with them later when they come up, like when Jesus has to pay a temple tax reluctantly. Things like that. We'll come back to our categories. Jesus didn't pay tax to the temple elites. That means he wasn't a registered temple Jew. But those things are for later. We'll get deep into these categories later. Because right now, we just want to know, who was Paul talking to in the synagogues of Acts, and who did he think he was talking to in the synagogues in Acts? That's what we want to look at. So before we go to their language, I want to go to our language. Okay? And let's just review this. In our language, what we're trying to do, and we do it sloppily. I understand that sometimes we're sloppy, okay? But what we're trying to do is articulate and navigate in the accurate ancient categories without using words that drags in modern baggage in your brain, right? We're working against faulty schema. Schema is the organizational pattern in your brain. Every person listening has faulty schema. We say Israel, you think of something. That something could be 30 things, and they're all different. And none of them might be what we mean when we say Israel. We say Christian, and your brain goes to 500 things. And none of those 500 things may be what we're talking about. We say Jesus, son of David, Jesus, the Christ. That's why I say David Christ all the time to mess people up. David Christos, the anointed king. We're changing our language to try to get through the schema of what people think we're saying, because these words, Hebrew, Jew, Israel, Christian, Pauline, all these words, oh my gosh, are so loaded with 2,500 years of theological baggage, intellectual spin, and category error. So we change our language to try to be as clear as possible. Sometimes we're going to stumble because it's messy, guys, but we're doing our best. And that's why we change our language. So when we say Ephraim, we're meaning a tribal, usually, we mean a tribal conglomerate of northern kingdom people, or the Ephraim tribe themselves. Make sense? So we're talking about northern kingdom as a whole, or the tribe of Ephraim. That's what we mean. Ephra, whether they're living in the land, okay, in King David's time, or they're scattered amongst Turkey in Jesus's time, or they're scattered out in the world in North Africa or frickin' China or frickin' Great Britain today. Ephraim people, that northern kingdom. That's what we're talking about. Ephrathite is an Ephraim bloodline remnant people who at one time in history were living in the ancient southern kingdom of Judah. This is the land of Ephrath, Rachel's burial site, King David, and his direct lineage. Okay, this isn't all of Ephraim. Ephrathites are a remnant Ephraim bloodline people group who were positioned away from the rest of the tribe of Ephraim, positioned away from the rest of northern Israel. But they were Ephraim bloodline living separately in ancient southern kingdom of Judah. This is King David's direct lineage. That's what we mean by Ephrathite. Okay? Ephrathite and Ephraim are not the same. All Ephrathites are bloodline Ephraim, but not all Ephraim is bloodline Ephrathite. And not all northern kingdom Ephraim, not all tribal Ephraim is Ephrathite, and not all northern kingdom Ephraim is Ephrathite. Ephrathite is a very small, very specific lineage of King David. Okay. Then we have the house of David. We always say the Davidic covenant, the house of David. Who's the house of David? The house of David is Israel. And that includes, because David ruled Israel. And that includes both Judah and Ephraim, southern kingdom, northern kingdom, commoners, the peasantry, the north and the south. That's what we mean. Don't give a shit about ethnicity. Don't give a shit about religion. Don't give a shit about religious beliefs throughout history. These are the covenant people of Israel in the house of David, living in the southern or northern kingdom and following David's God and David's God's covenant, period. Make sense? When we say Israel, we usually mean the house of David that I just described. Occasionally, we mean Ephraim North, and I usually correct that because Israel was the name of the northern kingdom, but we don't even like to use that word because it's got so much baggage in modern times and so much theological nightmare with it that we like to say Ephraim North. Okay? So in the prophets, you'll see them talking to Judah and Israel. Okay? So they're talking about northern and southern kingdoms, but we haven't really worked through the prophets right now. So for our purposes, we use Ephraim a lot instead of Israel to get that in your head, because Ephraim is a nickname for the northern kingdom. So when we say Israel, we're almost always talking about the house of David, okay? Meaning the Israel that David ruled, not the Israel of the Babylonian Persian elites, not the Israel of modern Rothschilds. We mean the Israel of King David, that Israel. All right, and occasionally it means the northern kingdom. When we say the word Jew, we mean ancient political priesthood, because there's no separation of church and state, who are temple-aligned elites or loyal to temple-aligned elites. Okay, so it's the elites and their followers. These could sometimes include people from Israel, Ephraim, Judah, who haven't yet rejoined the house of David. There are some temple-aligned people who are following the elites who will eventually come into the fold of the reunited house of David. There are some temple-aligned people who will come into the fold. Those are Jews. If they are not under strict Persian legal category temple loyal, they aren't Jews. That's how we're using that word. That is, we're using the Pauline category, okay? And you'll see that in a minute. Nobody else is. They think they are. So when we say Jew, we do not mean Israel. We don't mean Ephraim. We don't mean Judah. We don't mean all Judea, all Judeans. We don't mean the house of David. We don't mean dispersion communities. We don't need ethnically similar people. We don't mean people who sort of kind of follow Torah. None of that. None of that. It's the ancient political priesthood temple-aligned elites, post-Babylon and Persia, and their loyal followers who registered with them legally and pay temple taxes. That's who it is. And you're going to see how small that group actually is. There weren't many people who were legally aligned and loyal to the temple cartel. There weren't many. They were a minority and had very small amount of power in the grand scheme of the Roman Empire, just saying. And that's something that you're going to learn today, is how significantly insignificant this group of elites actually was in the story of Jesus and James. Who it was important to was Paul. That's who that was important to. Wasn't important to Jesus and James because they weren't in that category. So what we have to understand, the next part, is we've been talking a lot about Ephraim. But what about Judah? Because Jew isn't Judah. We never put Jew and Judah together because they're different things. Because to us, Judah is the peasantry people of the southern kingdom under David, right? The southern people that David united. So what happened to Judah? Why aren't we talking about the Judah peasantry? Because when we say Israel, we mean north and southern kingdom together under David. But we say Ephraim, meaning north. Ephraim means north. Judah means south. So why aren't we talking about the southerners? Where did they go? Because it's certainly not the elites in Babylon. That's not Judah. So where did Judah's peasantry actually go? And why doesn't anybody talk about these people? Well, it's not convenient to your temple post-Babylon elites. It's not appropriate for the Edomites and the Persians who took over. The Levites looking at you, sellouts. Kingdom of Judah's rural population, we're talking farmers, shepherds, craftsmen, village families. This group of people is the single most neglected demographic in the entire biblical story. But the elites who came back and started the temple cartel pretend it's them. It's not. They stole the identity and the covenant of the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. The elites wrote the text. So the elites wrote themselves into the center of the story. So not only are our northern Ephraim lost, but our southern Judah peasantry just got stomped out of existence because it's the elites now. You heard Bart Ehrman himself. Well, when did they suffer and who caused the suffering? Well, the elites that came back from Persia were the ones that suffered. What? Did you hear that? It's so insanely offensive. Archaeology tells a different story. The elites put themselves in the middle of the whole thing in the ancient Hebrew Bible, and Hebrew's not a language, Hebrew's a people. So they stole the stories of the people and put themselves in the middle of it. Assyria, the first invasion that people like Bart Ehrman never discuss. People like Tobias Singer don't like to talk about this one either. And I can't find very many Christian preachers out there that like to point to Assyria. It's all about Babylon. They also don't talk about Persia, right? But they don't talk about Assyria. Long before Babylon, Assyria scattered Judah's countryside. They don't tell you that. Even though the Bible frames it as Israel fell, Judah survived, that's their cherry-picked verses, guys. There's plenty of evidence in the Bible that Judah didn't survive. They just don't show you that part, just like they don't show you Psalm 78 is a ritual curse, a maskil curse. Just like they don't show you the two voices. Just like they don't show you Genesis 48. Just like they don't show you the different categories of Jews in synagogues in Acts 9. So all they do is cherry pick, and Judah survived. No. There's plenty of things in the Bible. Assyria burned Judah's villages. Assyria deported Judah's rural families, seized farmland, relocated populations into other provinces, and left Jerusalem swollen with refugees, thus all the forced conversions. Judah's peasants were fractured and displaced before Babylon ever came on the scene. No one likes to talk about that because the elites make it all about them because they're Judah now and they're Israel now. That's why. They stole both identities, guys, of both kingdoms. If you're a commoner, that should piss you off.
I am sorry. I truly am. But I did say it. No exceptions.
It already started under Assyria. Babylon just finished the job. Sometimes the biblical text will focus on this elite deportation, the nobles. The archaeology shows rural Judah actually lost 70 to 90% of its population. That's a fucking lot. Villages were completely abandoned. Agricultural terraces were collapsed. Only Jerusalem and a few fortified towns remained. That's the archaeology. And there are threads of this story in the Bible, if you know where to look and how to read outside of modern binary categories of elites. It's all about them. Temple elites, all about them. If you learn to look through that lens, stop looking through their lens and start looking through what was really happening on the ground, there's still strings to pull in the Bible about this story. So where did all those peasants go? They were absorbed into Edom, Moab, Ammon, Philistia, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon colonies. They were all across the Levant, guys. They didn't just stay home. They became the completely forgotten diaspora, which is why when the elites came back and rewrote everything and re-educated those that stayed behind, well, it wasn't that hard to take over. There was nobody left to fight from the north. There's nobody left to fight from the south. And if there were, their voices weren't loud enough. So they re-educated everybody and made it about them. That's what the elites did. So post-exile Judah is not the tribe, and it's not the kingdom of David, not even close. It's the elite remnant, not the Davidic remnant. Persia sent back the priests, the scribes, the aristocrats, not the peasants. So the Judah of Ezra and Nehemiah, that's just your Persian-approved elite. Your institutionalized rubber stamp on your forehead, running a temple state and claiming the name Judah, while the actual Judahite population is scattered all across the Levant. So we can't forget Ephraim, the north. Don't forget the brothers and sisters from Judah, because they got crushed too. Now, what gets really interesting, and I wanted to put this in here because as Jesus continues his ministry, we're just starting, guys. This is so cool. And it's absolutely beautiful. Jesus's ministry zones actually match the lost populations wonderfully. He's moving through zones where the lost populations of both houses lived. Judah's peasants were scattered all across, but they became the forgotten Judah. And Jesus' ministry zones match the locations of these scattered populations of the north and the south, because he's restoring both houses, Israel and Judah's peasants, which puts a whole new spin on those who have ears to hear and the two dodgeball teams, the peasantry with fish guts on their shirt and the elites. Something to see it now? The temple elites that the scholars so love, that Bart Ehrman in that interview we just watched last time, seems to think they're the ones that suffered so much in the Isaiah prophecy. Yeah, it's all about them. Yeah, sure, Ermin.
The more you fight back, the harder it will be.
The temple elites are the only group that Jesus does not treat as his people. They're not going to tell you that either. So we get a modern cartoon version. And this is a version that people get in pop scholarship, most documentaries in Sunday school. There was one Judaism with one temple. It descended in a straight line from David. They never swayed, except for those darn northerners who rebelled and they got carted off, but don't worry about them. The good guys stayed behind and ran the next temple. And everyone was all a part of it. They all supported it. This was the one true religion. And the Sadducees and Pharisees, well, they were sort of like Republicans and Democrats. And anyone else not associated with the elites from the temple in the Second Temple period, well, anything else. They were just, pagans running around with Dionysus or something. And Jesus, well, of course, he was one of these people. So, he wasn't running around with Dionysus. He must be a temple guy. That makes him Jewish, which makes him just a peaceful Jewish reformer trying to fix a system, because there's only one system. And that system's the temple, and that's from David. So Jesus had to be in that system and trying to fix it. That's what they tell you. That is not accurate. That is the Pleiades version, scholars. When you guys say shit like that, I'm like, oh, the starseeds are talking about the Pleiades again, because it's not there. The ascended masters from the first century came and told them that this is how it was. That's literally what the scholars are doing. Well, the ascended masters from the first century said that's what it was. So that's what it was. And that's what they're telling you. It's tidy, it's simple, it's wrong. And yes, they make it sound like Jesus was running for office at the temple at the Green Party ticket. Just peace, man. Let's be nice, guys. That's not what it was. The real map, when it actually existed, is the temple, quote unquote, with the elites that suffered so terribly in Babylon and came back fulfilling all these prophecies, because it's all about them. Yeah, those elites with the temple cartel, they only ran Judea proper. That's all they ran. They didn't have any power in Rome except that one little slice. They didn't have anything to do with the Galilee. They didn't have anything to do in Samaria. Not the Golan, not the Decapolis, not the dispersed folks all through the Levant and the Roman Empire. I want you guys to think it's like DC only running DC. If Washington, D.C. was only allowed to run Washington, D.C., that's what it was. Okay? And Jesus is like in Puerto Rico. He doesn't even pay taxes. That's how far off the temple Jesus is. Okay? Not only is he not in their legal jurisdiction, he is not in the temple legal jurisdiction at all, or their religious jurisdiction. But no separation of church. He's not under their registration. He doesn't belong to the temple. They can't even legally touch him until he walks into their territory. Not only that, he doesn't even pay them tax. So he's like Puerto Rico, Jesus, not even paying tax to Washington, D.C. Beltway. That's what he is. But they're so desperate to tie Jesus to the quote-unquote Jewish elites from Persia. They can't do it. It's not historical. It's nonsense. The Pharisees and Sadducees weren't political parties. They were two competing legal schools inside one tiny little Washington, D.C. jurisdiction, arguing over how to run the temple bureaucracy. That's what they're doing. Bureaucracy, okay? They were not national leaders. They were not representatives of all Israelites. They certainly weren't spokespeople for the Galilee. They weren't mainstream anything. These guys, DC think tank lawyers, arguing over policy in a district that most people didn't live in and didn't give a shit about. I want you to think of that. They weren't mainstream, guys. That's why the scholars love them. You see it now? Institutionalism. Exactly what Jesus was fighting. Can't tell you that. They're in the institution. Jesus was fighting everything we stand for and represent. And by the way, all of our categories too. Like, they can't tell you that. Everyone else wasn't just running around with Dionysus if they weren't part of the little tiny, teeny temple people. They were Hebrews, Hebrew people. They were Israelites, not Jews, not temple Jews from Persia. They were ancestral clans, rural communities who had their own customs, their own way of worshiping their God, passed down from generations to generations to generations, their own traditions within their family and within their community, and how different that is from place to place. They were generational expats via dispersion instead of choice. Think of that. Today we have expats, right? Bunch of surfer guys down in Costa Rica, you're expats. Well, instead of going there to get away from America and live a quiet life, they were sent there by Washington, D.C. Okay? You've got these generational expats who were thrown out a long time ago. It doesn't mean they're running around with Dionysus. You got regional identities and independent synagogues. This is the one they don't want to tell you. They don't want to tell you that there were a plethora of synagogues that had absolutely nothing. Not only did they not have anything to do with the Jerusalem temple Persian Jews, but they were hostile to them and still had a legally recognized under Rome synagogue. They won't tell you that. Guys, there were so many sectarian groups. One of these scholars could pull their head out of their ass and write a book about that to educate Christians on this. They won't do it. They won't do it because it takes away from the quote unquote, everyone was a good temple Jew. Takes away from that. All of Israel, all Hebrew, it all means the same thing. Temple elites, temple cartel. That's what it means now. Everybody. One big fancy Judaism. And they have to keep that in place not for the current Jewish identity mythos, but for the Christian identity mythos. Because they figure out that Christianity is not a natural offshoot from the temple, which was a natural offshoot from David. The Christian identity falls apart. You see that? They need this linear story. Well, there was God, and then there was David, and then there was the second temple, period, Solomon. Solomon and David are completely aligned. That's the first ridiculous thing. And then the second temple period came back, and that was David too. And then, well, you know, the elites went away and came back and fixed everything. And then right from that elite temple structure, well, the Christianity. Don't look anywhere else. That's what they need to believe for both of their identities and both of their institutionalized religions to hold any water. But as soon as you start asking Luke 10 dumbass protocol questions like, excuse me, what's an independent synagogue? Their entire framework collapses. And they can't do that. They can't do that, guys. These people who were not good temple, loyal, aligned Persian era Jews, they weren't pagans. They weren't outsiders. They weren't bad Jews. They were just not temple people, dude. They're like, I don't give a shit about DC. We've been here. Our generational family lineage has been around a shit ton longer than these hotshots over in DC, just saying. Jesus was not a temple insider trying to reform the system. Just wasn't. He was in Galilee under a local ruler outside temple jurisdiction, practicing ancestral Hebrew traditions, not following the Pharisees, and not even paying the temple tax, which means he wasn't registered as a temple Jew. Except, well, he paid one tax reluctantly. Jesus is not at all part of the Jerusalem bureaucracy. So why do they keep telling you that he is? He wasn't a reformer. He wasn't even inside their system at all. He's like, piss off. Piss off, Jerusalem. That's what he was. Piss off, DC. I'm trying to listen to you. Who the hell are you? Davidic. My line of David has been here a hell of a lot longer than you DC hotshots coming in, you elites, trying to make it all about you. Who the hell are you guys? That's Jesus. But the modern fairy tale from the Pleiades Klingon planet that these scholars keep wanting to shove down your throat collapses diversity, erases jurisdictions, flattens regional identities, confuses bloodlines, pretends that the temple just ran everything, pretends Jesus was part of that system, pretends Paul's categories are universal and everyone thinks the way Paul does about Jews and Gentiles, pretends that all Israelites were one unified religion. And by the way, that religion was the one the elites said so. Guys, it's a narrative drywall job, but guess what? The plumbing is leaking everywhere and they can't patch the fucking holes fast enough. That's why they sound ridiculous and contradictory. A drowning man grasps at a straw. So why does this Jesus was a peaceful Jewish reformer sound so absurd? Once you know the categories we're about to lay out, because that phrase is built on post-Reformation, post-Paul, post-Second Temple, post-Christian categories, not the categories that Jesus lived in. It's literally describing a contestant on Survivor using the rules of Jeopardy. And it's ridiculous. That's why we see scholars who are like, shut up. You guys are so dishonest. So dishonest in rewriting history. And it's disgusting because you know better. And if you don't know better, you should return your PhD because you should know better. So what you're seeing is scholars using temple categories, elite categories, Washington, D.C. categories. That's what they're doing. Okay. The Vatican, what the Vatican says. Okay. That's what they're doing. Ancient Persian elite temple categories, civil law, all that stuff we talked about before. And they say Jesus was a Jewish reformer because he's part of the temple system. No, he wasn't. So because he was part of the temple system, he's trying to fix it. Okay, but he wasn't part of the temple system to begin with. He's a Pharisee-adjacent moral teacher. No, he wasn't. There were no Pharisees before Persia. Jesus is Davidic. Davidic has nothing to do with Persia. Davidic doesn't even have anything to do with Solomon. You guys aren't going back far enough to the religion of Jesus. It wasn't the temple. Well, Jesus was a synagogue pastor or rabbi with better sandals. This is the DC bureaucrat version of Jesus. It's tidy. It puts him as part as the elite institution that they said it's safe. And it's also wrong. Jesus is in pre-Persia categories, scholars. Stop following the Persian elite, for fuck's sakes, guys.
I need you to know me. So, back to it.
Paul, on the other hand, Paul is following the Persian elite. This is why your institutions love Paul. Your scholars love Paul. Your Christians love Paul. Even your Jews love talking about Paul. Because Paul uses his own categories. Okay, ready for Paul's categories? Everyone outside the temple system, the elite Persian temple system, is a Gentile. So if you're not registered with the Persian elite bureaucracy of Washington, D.C., well, you're a Gentile. Now, this is funny. This is Paul's category. And when you read Paul this way, this is funny. Because this would include Galileans, Samaritans, any Jews in the dispersion anywhere all over the Levant and beyond, rural Israelites, and Jesus and James themselves were not temple registered legal tax-paying guys. They were not in temple jurisdiction, religiously or otherwise. Remember, separation of church and state, guys, there wasn't any. They were not politically, therefore not religiously, affiliated with the Jerusalem temple. Their religion is David, who was in the Ephrathite land long before there was a temple. Of course, they're not aligning themselves with the temple. David kept the Ark of the Covenant, hint, hint, covenant, separate from the temple. Why would Jesus go and be loyal to a bunch of temple elites from fucking Persia who rolled into town 5 years ago? Give me a break. Oh, hi, guys. Welcome 3 seconds ago. You guys must know what you're talking about. It's not what happened. But in Paul's mind, the only legitimate, quote unquote, Jew is those in the temple system, legally registered. I want you to imagine a Catholic church pops up in your neighborhood. And they have this legal. Okay. And if you want to go, you have to go and register with that church. Okay. In Paul's mind, you are legit if you registered with the church legally. If you didn't, well, you're a Gentile. You don't even get to be a Christian. Think about that. Catholic Church, Orthodox Church pops up in your neighborhood. Everybody has to run and quote unquote register their legal status and pay taxes to the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Catholic Church. And if you don't, well, you're not Christian. That's what Paul's doing, but with the temple. So under his categories, Jesus is a Gentile. That's how absurd Paul is. It's absurd. So basically, because the temple had such a small Washington, D.C. beltway control system, it was in a small area, basically everybody was a Gentile in Paul's eyes. That's how your scholars are going. They're going with Paul's binary. Temple, legal, bureaucracy, cartel, from the Persians. If you were loyal to that, you're a Jew. Anybody else, regardless of beliefs, ethnicity, location, doesn't matter. If you are not aligned legally with that temple and loyal to that temple, you're a Gentile. That's Paul. So, okay, scholars, if that's the definition you want, that's the definition we'll use. But what we're not going to do is pretend that that narrow definition of Paul Jew, had any covenants at all. Because we're actually going to talk about the other categories that you seem to forget are there. But the people themselves on the ground use ancestral categories. They don't give a shit about Persia coming in. They're saying we're Hebrews, we're Israelites. We're Ephraim, we're Naphtali. They're Israelite by ancestry. We have a covenant with God, not outsiders, not temple bureaucrats, not Pharisee disciples who popped up with Persia came into town. They're not under Jerusalem. This is the category that Jesus actually lived in. Why aren't they telling you this? And when you read the Bible with these categories, it actually starts making sense. This is why Luke had Judaeus, Jews, and Hellenists, which your Bible so conveniently translated as Greek-speaking Jews. Like they just had a different language. They're all Jews, just a different language. Pay no attention to those categories. You've got Jews and Greek-speaking Jews. Like they talked different. Are you kidding me? Translators? So if we had a Jeopardy game show lineup, this is Jesus's category for 500, Alex. I'll take that. I'll take Jesus category. What category is Jesus in for 500? The scholars yell, Jesus was a Jewish reformer. But they don't define Jewish. Paul, well, everyone outside the temple system is a Gentile. So absurdly enough, Jesus and James are Gentiles. But Jesus and his people, like, we're Hebrews, we're Israelites. It's a thing. Hello. And Rome is sitting in the back of this mess going, we don't even fucking care what any of you call yourselves. Just don't fucking start a riot. This absurdity, guys, this is what's going on. So why the peaceful Jewish reformer line just makes me want to rip my face off and scream, because it's assuming Jesus was part of the temple elite from Persia system, that he accepted their authority at all, that he was trying to improve their halakha. He was a Pharisee adjacent teacher. No, he was none of those things. He wasn't a reformer of their system. He was a threat to it. Dipshit scholars.
That's not how it works.
So let's look at the word synagogue. Not all synagogues are Jewish. And when we say Jewish, temple cartel from Persia aligned. Okay. The Persian temple cartel that set up shop like DC after Babylon, Persia. They come back from Persia. The elite aristocrats set up shop. Okay. That temple. That's Jewish. Not all synagogues were aligned or registered legally with the temple. They didn't have to. Synagogue in frickin' Galilee does not have to register with the Jerusalem temple. They have to register with Rome. A synagogue in southern Turkey does not have to register with the Jerusalem temple cartel. They can if they choose to, but they don't have to. They can collect their own taxes and do their own thing and pay directly to Rome and give legal covering for their people and have nothing to do with Jerusalem. That's a fact, Jack. So no, synagogues are not all Jewish temple aligned, Jerusalem temple aligned, cartel. No, they're very different and they're all legal. You have to know which quote unquote synagogue Paul is standing in throughout his letters and throughout Acts to have any idea of who the fuck he's even talking to. Why don't your scholars teach you that? Preachers, looking at you. You guys went to seminary. Why aren't you guys talking about this?
Now, I already told you people. First one's free. Then what I say? I said I will shut that shit down.
So A, we have temple loyal Judean synagogues. Okay, these are the ones that are loyal to the temple in Judea and in Jerusalem, and they're loyal to that priesthood cartel that set up shop, the elites sent back from Persia. Those guys, they pay the temple tax, they enforce quote unquote purity rules, they're loyal to the elite priesthood. These are your ass-kissing Catholics who are still loyal to the Pope. Okay, those guys. They're the ones that expelled people. You heard that rabbi in the last video say, we would just kick them out. And that gave you a legal problem. So generally, they went to a synagogue that wasn't registered with the temple. Make sense? Makes sense. These are the synagogues that caused the riots in Acts. This is the temple that Paul went to first. The first people in Acts 9 that tried to kill him. This is who he's talking to. Because they say, why did you come here to arrest people and now you're preaching Jesus? Didn't you come here to arrest Jesus people? Why are you preaching something else now, Paul? Well, if Paul walked into a synagogue that wasn't temple aligned, They would have laughed him out of the room if he came in with a warrant for extradition. They'd be like, we're not fucking loyal to the temple. You can't touch us. So of course he was in the synagogue talking to the ones who were temple aligned. Those were the only ones that would have helped him arrest people and honor his warrants. So those are the ones saying, didn't you come here to arrest people? He can't arrest people in a different synagogue. They would have laughed at him. They're not accepting the temple. So the first category in Acts are the Jewish temple loyalists. Then you have independent synagogues. They're not controlled by Jerusalem Judean elites. They're often anti-temple. And they're often, there's that word Hellenistic. Oh boy. Wait a minute. You mean the Hellenized went to synagogue, didn't go to the temple? They had their own synagogues. You know why? Because they were freaking Israel, dude. That's why. Your Hellenists were the Hebrews.
Oh, damn. Were you?
The lost sheep. That's who the Hellenists were. Oh. The ones that Paul called Gentiles. They were sometimes Samaritan adjacent. Sometimes they had mixed populations. But these, independent of the temple, were safe spaces for dispersed Israel, House of David people, Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom, peasantry, anti-temple groups, Jesus followers, people who were kicked out of Jerusalem temple. Paul spends most of his time in these, which is why he's saying, I'm going to the Gentiles. But the Bible's telling you he's going to the Jews. Because in biblical fantasy land, well, all these people, well, they're just Jews. See that? Not Paul. Paul thinks not loyal to the temple, not controlled by Judean elites, Hellenistic, Israelite diaspora, Samaritan, mixed, Jesus followers, and anyone expelled from Jerusalem, well, those are Gentiles. Then you've got your quote-unquote house church. Remember that one? How they're like, oh, they had to set up ecclesiastes in their own houses. Yeah, these weren't churches. They were clubs, civic clubs. I want you to think YMCA or like university clubs that focus around common interests or ethnicity, okay? These were legally recognized voluntary associations, not synagogues, not political parties. They weren't illegal. They certainly weren't temple loyal. They were simple replacement legal registering places for expelled Israelites. These were house gatherings, but they were also allowed to legally register you. You had to be part of some group. So they had the legal ability to help you do that, have a legal cover as part of one of these groups. So usually what happened is these other, quote unquote, these Gentile synagogues, okay, these Gentile non-temple elite synagogues, that's where people would go who were not aligned with the temple folks, the temple cartel. And then from those, they would sort of have these different civic groups, like YMCA or university club groups for, oh, we're all these people with an ancestry of here, and we're all of this ethnicity. We all follow this tradition. So they kind of make their own little university clubs that kind of came out of these alternate synagogues. And when I mean alternate, I actually mean mainstream.
Oh, my goodness.
Because the synagogues in the minority were the temple-run ones. So the majority of synagogues were not aligned with the temple elite throughout the Roman Empire. And then within those synagogues, they also made these little branch-off groups, little civil groups. And those were totally legal, as long as A, you paid your tax to Rome, and B, you didn't militarize. They weren't having any militia groups going, okay? You could have a sewing circle, right? You can have a, ancient Reubenite sewing circle, but you're not going to get a militia together. So those are the house gatherings. They weren't quote-unquote churches, pastors. Sure, they talked about religious stuff because that was their life, but it's not like, oh, we're going to start a secret church. They weren't underground churches. They were civic groups in Rome. So I'm not saying that some of them didn't become underground churchy, but in this time, that's not what they were. So if you think back to our last little scholar roast, they're all correct, almost. So guess what, scholars? You all get a cookie. You're all right, except for that one lady who thinks that Jewish and Israelite gods are the same. So next time, we're going to go and look at our little star seeds, our star seed scholars revisited. We're going to take a look at this video. We're going to pull it up, and we're going to jump in, and we're going to do a quiz.
I got an idea. Eeny, meeny, mo.
And we're going to go slowly and pause as we go and listen to each of these scholars and rabbis and interviewers and all the people in this video who are popping up in mainstream Christian studies. And we're going to stop. And we're going to question them about where is their category error? Where is their assumption? Where's their bias? Where's their supremacy? Where's their bigotry? What institution are they holding up with the language that they're using? How do their categories collapse in what they're saying? Because until we can listen to these scholars, preachers, and rabbis and understand the wrong categories that they're feeding people, we can't understand what's going on. We need to look at them and say, where are they getting this? Which category are they in? Why is this biblically unsound? So we're going to quiz ourselves to see if we understand the categories enough to find the errors that the scholars themselves are making. That's what we're going to do. The next time, we're going to use it as a quiz, a knowledge check, right? Where did Bart Ehrman screw that up? That's what we're going to do. Greek philosophy is just starseed bullshit for PhDs. By the way, Persian cosmology, same thing. We're in a category maze, and they're not giving you the right categories. So who's Paul? We don't care, but they do. And we can consent to them, or we can refuse to consent to their categories. It's your choice. If you want to consent to the rabbi's categories, you may consent to his categories, but know what category he's in. If you want to consent to James Tabor's categories, consent to his categories, but know which ones they are. Does that make sense? We can't do that if we can't identify which categories they're using versus historical accuracy. That's the problem. We believe in informed consent. We don't believe in propping up institutional narratives here. So then we're going to look at when did Jesus quote the Aramaic Targum. We're going to take a look at that so I can show you how they wrote in things post-Persia into the Jewish book, the Jewish Targum, about cosmic dualism, second death, cosmic mediator that Paul used in his logos argument. He only used a Greek word, logos, because they were speaking Greek. But the concept of the logos, sorry, rabbis, that's Aramaic Targums. That's not Plato. And who are the Hellenists really? We're going to look pretty deep into the Hellenists. We're going to check out the evolution of this logos idea, why they tried to kill Paul. We're going to look at Stephen's speech in a whole new light. We'll finally get to resurrection with competing cosmologies and the Davidic covenant resurrection model. Sorry, not sorry. It is what it is. And we'll do all that the next time.
I am sorry. I truly am. But I did say it. No exceptions.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. I listen. Don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.